Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacassa. And again, this week we have another great guest for us. Before we dive into that, please follow us on the podcast. Leave a review if you would. Really easy to do that, especially in Apple. It helps us a ton. Other than that, go to the website, www.ffipodcast.com. Great blog, lots of courses going out now, so feel free to join us in those areas. We're getting a terrific response on that. People are learning all kinds of new things, so we'd love to have you join us there. If you're not doing that, follow us again on the podcast. Have some fun today. We're going to dive into a great guest that we have, and that's Dallas Voss. Dallas is from Kenai, Alaska, grew up there, raised there. Parents originally from California, but that's a whole nother story where we can maybe even get into that. However, today we're going to talk about how she spent the past 7 years guiding up there with her partner. And then she's also been fly fishing for over 10 years, kind of grew up on the water fishing your whole life. So you know the area very well. And Kenai specifically has some very special things to offer from a fly fishing experience in Alaska. So we're going to talk about what Kenai has to offer. And the last part of today's podcast and our tip is understanding the pink salmon years. So if you're not familiar with what pink salmon years are and how they contribute to the fishing systems up in Alaska, this is a great tip to understand. So Dallas, welcome to the call. It's great to have you on. I'm excited about this one because I love fishing in Alaska and I love the experience of the whole Alaskan style and formula for, I think, adventure is what I would describe it as. It's really cool.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And you have some really special stuff on the Kenai. So why don't you just kind of dive into a little bit about the Kenai system and how you see it a little bit differently than some of the other Alaskan experiences?
Well, for us, just, being able to be on that river with those fish is something unique. We're constantly fighting battles for protecting the fish that we have from everywhere from the salmon to the trout that we have on there. So protecting that so that our children will get to actually, utilize this resource when they're younger is something special that we're, as a state, always constantly working towards protecting. So being able to be out there and do that is a privilege. So it might not always be there. So the fact that we're actually getting to utilize it right now is really special.
Yeah.
And definitely want to keep it going for sure. So, especially for us that fly fishing for the rainbow trout, if anything, it's only getting better. More and more people, are practicing good techniques to keep these fish safe and with the catch and release and, keep them wet, don't, minimize handling with them. And because of that, these fish are getting bigger and stronger and we're getting to, again, utilize that and, go after those 30 inchers that might be out there in the system.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you made a great point there in that you're really focusing in on the trout, right?
Exactly.
Because the salmon in the system are typically running up the system and they're going to pass, right? So from a sustenance standpoint, it kind of makes sense, right?
Exactly. Right. They're going to die anyway. So it's a great food source. They're amazing. So the target, going after silver salmon on the fly is just as exciting as going after a rainbow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting to strip big streamers for them. Even the sockeye, you're using fly rods. It's not fly fishing, but it is still fun to fight them on a fly rod.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's definitely not fly fishing, but you definitely, it definitely gives it more play and it's a lot of fun too. So those are, an easy way to keep those rainbows safe because there's no reason to be eating those rainbows, right? We've got this amazing salmon runs that come through. What's the point of eating those rainbows when we can go eat these salmon? So
that's right. Yeah. And the rainbow are pretty amazing. So maybe you can kind of talk about, average size and average runs and things like that to kind of give people an example of what you're seeing there. Cause it's a different world from the lower 48 when you start to experience that.
Yeah. So, like most places we can fish for these rainbows year round, which you probably wouldn't think of in Alaska. The Kenai River will tend to freeze over majority of it, but there's a couple sections that doesn't freeze over. So as long as you can get out to it, whether you're pushing a drift boat across a frozen lake and then drop it in, a lot of people ride the snow machines into the holes to fish them. When the water allows, we can run our jet boat up to them. So, being a year-round fishery for these rainbows, which again is something we have to protect and make sure we're taking care of these fish in the wintertime, and keeping them in the water as much as possible. So that way it doesn't do any harm to them. But so year round, we get to target them. Obviously, as the salmon start entering the system, these trout are just going to gorge themselves on the eggs more and more and get bigger and bigger. And so come September, October, these fish are big and feisty and just a lot of fun to target for sure.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they get really big. And it's funny because, down here in the States, in most places you go to, a 20-inch rainbow is a really good sized fish. In my experience in Alaska, a 20-inch fish is kind of like an average.
Yeah. Sorry.
In a
Go
lot
back
of
to the
ways.
question. Yeah. The sizes, I would say, I would expect your average for the day to be around that 16 to 18 inch, and if you start getting over 20, you're excited. But you're looking for the 25 plus, for me, I'm not even bringing that fish to hand unless it's over 25. You release it with a hook releaser or net it real fast and just unhook it. You're not, and that's going to depend on your fishing and where you're at in your journey.
Right.
There's still plenty of people that are coming up to Alaska the first time, and they hook into a 20-inch fish.
And they're like, "Oh my Lord,
that's an amazing
huge!
Fish, right?
That's amazing fish!" Right.
For us as guides, just understanding our clients' expectations and what their experience is. Hey, 28 fish, that's important to them. Okay. And some people might be smaller, right? Some people never fly fished at all or caught a rainbow before. So, that 15, 16 incher might be their PB. So, understanding that and then going from there. But for me personally, anything under 25, it was good fish. You still had fun fighting it, but there's no point, you don't need that grinning photo with it.
Right. And I think the other thing is, you're really when I go to Alaska, my goal is a 30-inch fish.
Absolutely.
And I think that's for a lot of people. And what's amazing to me is the power and acrobatics of a fish that size.
Absolutely.
And maybe you can kind of describe what you see in those areas. Like someone hooks into, say, a 30-inch fish, right? What does it do?
Well, I can speak firsthand on that. I hooked into one, oh gosh, when was it? Beginning of September. Husband and I just went out for just a day off, just the two of us, and was drifting our bead, dead drift, not really, just chit-chatting along. And my rod almost got ripped out of my hand when this fish hit. So my first instinct or thought was that it was probably, a salmon, silver hit it, or something. It hit it and there was no jump immediately. And I was just like, whoa. And even my husband, who was running the boat at the time, was like, what was that? That was something different. I'm like, and I'm sitting there holding the rod like, okay. And then all of a sudden, it goes airborne.
Right.
And get to see it, and then, the moment for me was noticing, okay, it's got a red stripe. It's not a silver because it was the size, if not bigger than a silver. Unfortunately, I was not able to land it. And so it jumped, fought it through a jump, threw it through a couple runs. It was one of those things, even the fish that size, because we're drifting down, with most places on the river, right? You're drifting down with it. You're not going to go into your backing with them per se. So we're still drifting down. So it's making a good run, but it's not really, taking a ton of line from us since we're following it. Comes back up towards us off to the side. And then literally just a quick head shake, something had gone wrong angle of the rod or something, and it was gone. So, there are some big ones that will come to the boat easily, no problem. We've had a beginner last year who'd never touched a fly rod that landed a 27 incher, put up a good fight, but he was able to get it in, and then there's some that make you work for it, so there are plenty of people that still don't have that 30 incher just because they haven't found that that fish to cooperate.
That's right.
So, but then you have people that have never touched a rod that, will get lucky and get something like that. And they don't some people don't even appreciate it either. You're like, oh, cool. That's a cool fish.
Yeah,
like,
that's a cool fish. You're like, that's a big fish.
30-inch fish.
Yeah, the guide's more excited, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Too funny. Yeah. Too funny. But it's amazing. I'm always amazed at how hot they can be at that size. Because usually when you catch a lot of fish of that size. It's like maybe they do one run and they're like done, right? You
Right.
know, and they kind of roll over. But for me, I think because the food is so rich in protein, they're so well fed.
Hmm.
Plus, they're coming from saltwater environment or they're
Right.
coming from a lake environment and just feeding, etc. They like, man, they will just crush. And the acrobatics, like multiple
Hmm.
jumps and
Yeah.
the long swims, they don't just sit on the bottom and go 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 go.
No.
I mean, it's a really cool fight. So
Yeah.
something to experience as an angler, very special.
Absolutely.
Well, super cool. Let's talk a little bit about what you were describing earlier as, hey, look, you could come fish the Kenai in a day. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be a 10-day trip. And that's one of the things that's really different for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Being on the road system, so you can drive, fly into Anchorage and then drive straight to the Kenai in less than 3 hours. They call the Kenai Peninsula Alaska's playground, and it absolutely, or Anchorage or Alaska's playground, what have you. But it absolutely is. There's so much that we can offer for a whole family event down on the Kenai Peninsula. Everything from bear viewing to glacier tours, kayaking, hiking, fishing, and being on that road system allows people to come down with their families. Go hiking, and then hey, we're gonna go fishing and just do a daily trip here or a daily, go out to the saltwater and do a trip out there.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it affordable for those that don't have 10 grand to go spend in Bristol Bay. They have this option. Okay, we can still get the Alaskan fishing experience. We can still go see the bears on the river. We can still go do all these things that you would think of when you think of fishing in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
But we can do it for a little bit more affordability and actually still do other things with our family as well. So
Yeah.
for those that don't want to fish, can go do other activities while those are fishing, and it just makes it really easy for those coming up from the States to come enjoy.
Yeah. And I really love the time commitment aspect of it, right? If I'm up there, whether it's a couple's trip or a family trip,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't have to commit, 10 days of
Yeah, no,
fishing. I can
right.
I can go out for a day and really
Mm-hmm.
enjoy myself. And if I don't want to go out as a whole entire family, I can go out with a partner or by myself, and the rest
Mm-hmm.
can go do another activity because there's so much to do in the
Right.
area, and it's just a plethora of opportunity from an
Right.
Alaskan standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another thing is, it's not one of those situations where you need to book out, years in advance to get it, to get what you want. For that, I guess what I should say is, if you want a specific time frame and specific guide, yes, you need to be booking well in advance. But there's so many guides on this river in these areas that last minute trip to Alaska. Okay, it's easy to still find a guide
Mm-hmm.
and be able to get out there and still make it happen. So especially with some of the salmon runs, right? There are guides doing doubles, even triples a day of trips. So
Okay.
it makes it easy. So you come up to Alaska and you might not know what you're doing or what you want to do in the family. Oh, hey, we decided we'd like to go fishing. It's not terribly hard to find a guide and be able to get out on this river
Yeah,
system. So,
and most guys are pretty qualified. I mean,
eh,
it's not like
right.
it's this rarity of finding a guide that's fairly well qualified. Let's talk about gear. You just
Hmm.
mentioned gear a little bit of like,
Hmm.
hey, and you decide, oh, I want to go fishing, I want to get out.
Right.
But you don't have to really bring gear. Isn't that
No, I mean,
correct?
yeah, for us, at least for our business, we provide all the rods, waders, boots, tackle, everything that they would need for a day of fishing, right? So usually they're on the hook for their fishing license, and hopefully have some warm gear, rain gear, not
Yeah.
knowing what you're going to get with Alaska weather. But besides that, we provide everything. So it works out nicely for those that don't want to come up and pack their waders and their boots, especially, it makes it nice. We do let clients know, hey, if you've got a specific fly rod that really enjoy using, we typically like to use the 7 weights, 10 foot. But if you have something similar to that you'd like to use, bring it up. We'll get it rigged up the right way,
Mm-hmm.
and let you fish it. But for the most part, if that's just one more thing you're trying to bring up when you're bringing a stroller or all the other gear that you got to bring up to Alaska, it's one less thing that they have to worry about. So
Yeah. That in
yeah,
itself is like worth its weight in gold.
absolutely.
But there's also things you can offer too of like, hey, look, you came up, you fished some salmon,
Mhm.
you got your catch for the day. We talked about some sustenance fishing the other day. How
Mhm.
explain how that works? Because I remember my first time to Alaska and being like, oh, I get it now. Um, So if you could
Yeah.
explain the take and kind of packaging and getting home kind of stuff, be
Yeah.
great.
So obviously, our rainbows are what we love to go after, but you still want to have some meat. You want to be able to bring some food home and share it with friends and family. So having those great salmon runs that are coming through the Kenai system, everywhere from they start showing up in May, all the way through the silvers. Last silvers will stop showing up in October. So we can target different times throughout the season. These different salmon runs are coming in, and then depending on the Fish and Game regulations at the time, on how many you're allowed to keep. So traditionally, the sockeye season that's going on, you'll get to keep 3 per person per day. And if they reach their escapement goal, they'll actually increase that number to 6 per day.
Mm,
So it's potential you could come up, if you got a family of 4, you're going home with 24 fish in one day, so
right.
I don't know many people that will eat 24 fish throughout a
The
season,
season, right?
right? That's a lot of fish.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, on the river, we'll go ahead and we'll fillet those fish up for them. Most guides will flam, put them in bags, and then they get dropped off at processors that are all around the city, different places that you can take them to, which will then, clean up the fillets a little bit, vacuum pack them, freeze them, and put them in fish boxes. And then from there, the guests have an option of whether you can either at the end of your trip pick up those boxes and you can check them as a checked bag on your flight.
Hmm.
So depending on what airline you're using, that might be $50 for the box. You might have a free checked bag, so that might be a free option to get those fish home, assuming, you're under that 50 pounds. Versus, or if you're like, what, I want to be hands off, I don't want to deal with it. You let them know when you're going to actually be home, and they will ship it and make sure it arrives after you're home.
Yeah,
You definitely don't want that fish sitting on your doorstep,
that's right. Right.
in Arizona for a couple of days before you get there. So they'll make sure you're home, and obviously you're going to pay some extra money for shipping to get it down there. But that's
Yeah,
definitely more hands off versus having to worry about checking it and deal with it at the
yeah.
airport. So
It is cool though, because I remember my first time, and people were like, "You want?" I was like, "Yeah, of course, I want to take some Alaskan salmon home." Are you
oh
kidding
yeah.
me? Like, this stuff's delicious. And there was 2 points to that I thought were funny. One was, Friday night we're gonna have salmon, and
Mm-hmm.
the guys were like, "Oh man, salmon!" They ate it all the time, so they were like not excited like everybody else, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then the other was, we went out and caught salmon, and it was really interesting because, like you said, when it got processed, you had the option of, if you didn't catch your full 50 pounds, you could add to that as well. And then there
Mm-hmm.
was a
Oh, okay.
check,
Yep.
there was a check-in of, like you said, it cost me $50 to get an extra bag home on my airline. So I can take all 50 pounds at the max weight, or I can take less. And
Mm-hmm.
some people took more, some people took less. I took a bunch. I took all 50.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was never going to eat all that, but I knew that. But when I got home, man, if I needed my yard done, if I needed, some plumbing work done, it was like, hey, I'll trade you some fillets for that. And
Mm-hmm.
man, it was like barter city. It was awesome. And everybody wins. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
everybody wins on that scenario because the Alaskan salmon is just fantastic.
Oh yeah, we've found out that when we go to, I've got a sister that lives in Hawaii, so we're like, we want to go down there and do some bone fishing. We bring just some salmon with us, right? And they
Oh,
love
yeah.
Alaskan salmon. We're like, all right, if you can take me in your boat and go drop me off over there, here's some
That's
salmon,
right.
and it's a win-win for sure, and they love it. So
Well, that is by far a win because
yeah,
bonefish in Hawaii are another beast. Those are
absolutely.
actually are absolutely amazing fish. Absolutely amazing
Yeah, so
fish.
if anyone wants to take me over to the pyramids or triangles, not pyramids,
Yeah,
triangles in their
yeah.
boat, here's some fish. We got
Sign me
Alaskan
up, right?
salmon for you. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, very cool. So we get people up there, they fish for a day, etc.,
Mhm.
have some fun. You can take some fish home, all kinds of different activities. But the Kenai system fishes a lot like most Alaskan fisheries as well, in that it's really systematic in return to the various runs that you have. Now, are there any differences that you know of regarding the Kenai and in other areas that run, et cetera, that we should be aware of?
I mean, all the runs are slightly timed differently. What even just across the inlet, we've got a friend that owns a lodge across there, and they will get, their salmon and silver runs, a couple weeks before ours. So
Hmm.
definitely knowing, depending on which area you're going to go in, the timing's going to be off from each different area. But for the most part, pretty similar as far as the general, month, but, so there is some differences in that, but besides that, pretty similar. For us, we've got our king salmon run that starts coming in our first run. Each run, salmon has 2 runs that comes in. And we're not allowed to fish for our kings right now because they're having such a decline statewide, not just in the Kenai area, but statewide. But they'll show up in May 1st and then again in June. And then we've got our first run of salmon or sockeye salmon coming in like mid-June, but those are the Russian River sockeye salmon. So basically they're entering in the Kenai system, but they're running straight up to where the tributary is of the Russian and the Kenai. And then they'll run into that confluence and up that river. So that's a really unique fishery for those looking to catch fish really fast because they're being funneled into that the mouth there of the Russian. It's combat fishing. It's, you're fishing 2 to 3 feet away from the person next to you. So it's chaotic, but it is a lot of fun though at the same time. So they've got
because the volume is so high. Is that why?
The volume is so high. You're literally just throwing your line out there and flossing them in. It's amazing. Every other, cast, if you will. I don't know if you're familiar with the flossing technique, but yeah. Throwing it out there and bringing it in. So it is a lot of fun, but they have a system there. Everyone works together to make it possible of you standing so close, right? Or everyone would be tangled. So you kind of all cast at the same time. When you hook a fish, you take your fish to the shore. Someone will actually jump in your spot. So if you're not familiar with that, that's a huge whoa, someone jumped in.
Just took my spot.
He literally took my spot. A lot of fighting going on there, but no, everyone, so then you stand back and you wait for the next spot to open up, and then you take your turn in. Understanding kind of how that system works is definitely something to be aware of before you just jump in there.
That is cool.
Because it's definitely a spot where the locals like to come down, especially from Anchorage. They call it a suicide run. They'll get off work at 5:00, 6, whenever they get off work. They'll come down and they'll, so that you're looking at a 2.5 hour drive for them to get to the river, get set up. So, they're fishing by after 8 p.m. Obviously daylight's not a problem here, so that's fine.
Right.
So they're fishing.
I was just going to say.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not.
It's light all night, guys.
Exactly. So that timing wise doesn't work, but they'll get their fish, whether it be 3 or 6 at the time, put it in the back of their car and drive back home, so they're not getting in until after midnight. Not really, still really sure what's called the suicide run, but
probably because people fall asleep in the daylight, right?
Probably. So they come down and do that. So yeah, a lot of Anchorage locals will be there doing that. So definitely something to be aware of if you're visiting, to kind of go with the flow and understand how the process goes, so you're not upsetting anyone. But anyways, that's the first run of the sockeye salmon that's coming in. We'll see more on the lower part of the Kenai in mid-July to late July, early August. And that sockeye run is pretty big. Those fish get bigger than the ones that come into the Russian. And then we have our silvers that'll start showing up kind of like mid-August. And then the second run of that starts showing up kind of mid-September, early September, around that area. So you kind of have your different runs that kind of all run into, which makes it easy to just move through the season, targeting, the very next one. My favorite time being kind of that mid-August timeframe where you kind of get a mix of all of it. You can still hit the tail end of that sockeye season. You can get the beginning silvers that are starting to show up. And then that's when the trout bite starts to actually turn on really well, especially for the bead fishery. The kings that had come in May and June are now dropping. And so a lot of those holes are going to start to pick up because those trout are keying off on those eggs.
Those king eggs. Yep.
Exactly. So we throw on some bigger beads. And they're also starting to put on some weight by then too. So for me, that's probably my favorite because we can go out and target, 3 different species in a day. So which makes it really nice for those that coming up and wanting to experience all they can in one day of fishing. You can go get your limit of sockeye, all right, early, in the day.
Yeah.
Maybe try for a silver or 2, depending on how that run is doing at that time. And then in the day with some rainbow fishing. So it's definitely unique, and you kind of dabble in everything while you're up here.
In your silvers, are you fishing typically streamers for those guys?
Myself, we typically don't, just because where we're fishing on the Kenai, that's going to be conventional tackle. But for those that are fly fishing for them up more on the middle river is where you can be successful at that. And it is a lot of fun. Like I had said before, you're getting to throw the big purple and black,
Yeah.
pink streamers and stripping them really fast. Same, for it's, trying to mimic if you were throwing a spinner at them and reeling it
Right.
back in, right? So in this case, you're just stripping a big streamer back really fast, and they're going to hit it hard, and it is a
And they
lot of
do.
fun.
They crush. I mean,
Absolutely.
the first time you have one hit, you're like, whoa, that
Yeah.
was a whole nother world.
Hmm.
Um, and then they do some pretty nice running on that too.
Oh,
It's not like they're
absolutely.
just roll over for you. So
No, no.
really
Even
fun.
like even the sockeye, like I said, when you're flossing those sockeye in, they're gonna hit it and they're gonna hit it. They don't. Sorry, they're not hitting it. But when you hook
It
one,
feels like a hit. Yeah.
yeah, it feels like it. You're like, all of a sudden, there's something on there, and when they realize they've been hooked, they're gonna put on a good show for you too. So
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Explain flossing, because I think, well, there's two things. One, people may not understand exactly what
Right,
that is. Two is in the lower 48, flossing is it's a no-no, right?
right, right. Absolutely.
Because it's a technique that just isn't standard for fly fishing. But where you're at, where the volume's so high, et cetera, it
Mhm.
makes absolute sense.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
obviously, like we said before, it's not fly fishing. We are using the only reason we're even using fly rods for it is just because it's a lighter system or setup. Being a
mhm.
light rod, light reel. And because you're out there constantly, throwing that line out there, hours and hours at a time, you want that lighter setup, so not to kill your arm. So we're using fly rods, definitely not fly fishing. And basically, what you're doing is you're throwing the line straight out in front of you, about 10 feet, and then heavy weight, bringing that line down and letting it drift for about 4 or 5 seconds before you do, essentially what you're snagging, right? You're going to give it a big jerk at the end. And the idea is that weight has brought that line and that hook down on the bottom where the fish are swimming. And, they're swimming with their mouths open, as they're going upstream. And
Mhm.
that line is going to end up in their mouth. And when you jerk it, it pulls that hook into that fish's mouth, and will hook it, right?
Right.
And the reason we have to use that technique is because once the sockeye hit the fresh water, something tells them don't eat anymore, right? So they're here to spawn, and that's their primary objective.
Mhm.
So this has been the most successful way to find a way to get these salmon to actually bite, or not bite, but actually to hook them, right? Since they're
Right.
not
Right.
biting. And so I wish there was a different way of doing it, but this is just the most successful.
Yeah.
And obviously we call it flossing, but it is a fancy way of snagging them. They do want you to do it in the mouth. Um,
Yep.
and I
Not
think
the
that
back or tail
exactly,
or
you don't want them in the back tail. So anything that's not in the mouth, you do have to release and send back in.
okay.
And I think a lot of that comes down to protecting bycatch. For me, if you were out there just jerking that line, down the river system trying to catch your fish, that rainbow that just swam by is getting hooked, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So these other fish that you're not targeting are going to get hooked as well. And when you're flossing, sometimes a rainbow will get hooked, but not as often as if you were just,
Yeah.
pulling a hook through the system real fast.
And
So
if you're flossing correctly, like you said, your weight is
yeah,
set and you're down on the bottom.
right,
When you do hook set, like you said, it's that open mouth scenario. And what happens
right,
is you get a really good hook set in the actual jaw, like
absolutely.
into the bone.
Hmm.
And your ability to bring a fish in is significantly higher versus
Absolutely, yeah.
when
If
you're
you're
in a
yeah, if you're
snag
doing
situation or a weird eat situation. It's not the
yeah,
same.
no,
Yeah.
and if you're doing the technique correctly, you very rarely will hook them anywhere else.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how it all works out, but those that are paying attention and listening to the guide, it's usually and there's fish in the mouth, and if you do hook it someplace else, you're gonna know instantly.
Yeah.
The back or tail, it's gonna scream off the other way. It's gonna pull
Right. They
line
feel
off.
funny.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's
it
like,
doesn't. And it's one of those situations where if you hook it in the mouth and if you don't do much of anything, if you kind of just leave your rod right where you hooked it, that fish will take a couple seconds before it'll even know it's been hooked. It
right.
actually starts swimming back upstream and you're just like, wait, what's going on here? And it's gone back. And it isn't until you start to reel it starts to panic. And
Yeah. And go, whoa, 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 whoa,
yeah,
whoa.
yeah, something's going on here. So
And the other end of it is if you end up in it, like you said, a snag, like in the back or in the tail,
mhm,
like it's all from a fly angler perspective, just my own. I
mhm,
always feel like my first kind of clue is, oh my God, what do I do?
mhm,
Because it doesn't feel normal. It feels
right,
so off. You're
right,
like, how do I get rid of this thing without hurting it and,
mhm.
moving on, et cetera. But yeah, pretty wild how that happens.
Yeah, and then it'll be interesting, when we start targeting those rainbows in the fall, we'll actually hook into more sockeye because they're spawning, right? So we're throwing eggs or beads in the water, to
Right.
them, which are eggs, and so they're going after those, because they don't want this competition, especially like the bucks will go after and eat them, and all of a sudden you're like, got another sockeye on, it's a big blushed one you don't want to keep anyways,
Yeah, yeah.
and so you got to release it. It almost becomes a nuisance at that point.
It
If you're,
does.
you're catching so many sockeye
Right,
that you don't want
right.
to be
The
catching at
sockeye
that
can
point.
be like so thick that ducks could walk on them, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. And like you said, you hook into a sockeye, and there's two things I always think of when I do that is like, oh man, I want to get this thing off because I want to get the rainbow.
Yeah,
And
you
the
want that
second
rainbow
is
at the
this,
bottom.
how bad is this going to wreck my line? Do I have to
Hmm.
retie or not? Because
Yeah.
they have teeth. I mean, they're like,
Oh yeah.
they're beasts.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Just, or if they do put up a fight, and you're fishing, a 7 weight and not expecting to hook into a big sockeye with it, you want to
yeah,
protect your rod. So
you got
yeah.
to put the wood to them to bring them in.
Oh,
It's
absolutely. Yeah.
like
And
for
you're
sure.
trying to get them to the net without candy caning your rod. And yeah,
Right.
it's, yeah, like I said, it unfortunately becomes a nuisance at that point. If you wanted to keep them, it'd be different, but because they're completely spawned out, you're trying to get them back in the system, like you said, and you're targeting that trout that's sitting behind him, waiting for those eggs to drop. So,
Right, right. And I love how you describe it. It's almost like a nuisance. It really is. You're kind of like, you just
yeah.
want to get it off so you can get
Hmm.
onto the fish you're really targeting. And I have a similar scenario. We were fishing some garbage that was in the ocean once. And I remember it was like my first time kind of deep water fishing, and you could see all the Dorado cruising around, that's
Hmm.
obviously what we were going after. And
Right.
it was like, you'd cast in and you'd pull out a jack or a small shark or something. And it
Hmm.
was like the same thing. You're like getting that next to the boat, like shaking, like,
Yep.
get it off, get it off. I want the Dorado, throwing it out there. So it was really cool. But that's
Hmm.
exactly how it is in Alaska. I remember getting into the sockeye and being like, oh
Hmm.
no, not another sockeye. Come on, come on, come on.
Yeah, and it,
You
it
know,
makes for great fish stories because it'd be like, oh, I missed a really big one over there. I'm like, or did you miss a
the
sockeye?
sockeye,
Like, was
right?
that a really big rainbow? Like,
I love it.
it might have been a sockeye. Or I got something on really good. I'm like, yeah, but it's not jumping.
Right.
It's not really putting up a good fight here. We'll see what you've got.
Right,
So,
right. They're like steam engines, right?
hmm.
They just kind of
Yeah,
hit
they're
the
just
bottom and
hunkered
just
down
kind
there.
of
Yeah.
and pull you along, and you're like, oh, not what I was
Yeah.
looking for.
And it's
Very
not
cool.
unheard of for, there are those rare occasions where a big rainbow will do that. So you always want to, especially as a guide, if this client hooks into something big, but we haven't seen it yet, with the glacier water, we're not actually able to see what they've hooked into sometimes.
Yeah,
It'd be like, okay, just let's treat it like it's a big rainbow until I actually see that flash of red, right?
right.
Let's make sure before we, panic and just let loose and let it, lose it. So, that's always something to consider too, is you never know when you might just have, pardon me, a rainbow that just isn't jumping,
Yeah,
so
yeah. Great
it's
point.
definitely
The other
something.
thing too is if you haven't ever caught a sockeye, even if it's blushed,
Hmm.
they're beautiful fish. I mean,
Yeah.
a bright green mass, that hooked jaw, the humped
Hmm.
back. I mean, it looks so different and so
Right.
unique. I mean, prehistoric looking, right?
Hmm.
And to be able to actually handle one and remove a hook and just kind of see it, and then realize as you let it go or whatever, there's thousands, well, millions of
Hmm.
them in the river,
Hmm.
right? I mean, and to be able to walk small, I remember one of the first times walking a small river stream and just having that Red Sea part in front of me, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
wow, this is so amazing. And then they just get back together and go do their
Yep.
thing
Just,
again. And then
just,
you go fishing a little further upstream. And it's like, this is so amazing. There's such a plethora of life and
hmm.
opportunity here. And no wonder they're working like this and the system is working. And so it's really cool, I think, to have that Alaskan experience just to understand, holistically how the system works
Hmm.
and how
Yeah, and
things live.
obviously we're targeting them when they're, just coming in from the ocean. They got sea lice on them. They're pretty chrome still, and you have those people be like, they hook their first one and land it. And they're like, well, what is this? I'm like, this is your, sockeye red salmon. They're like, no, we're looking for the, the green head and the red back. I'm like, yeah, those are when you don't want to
Yeah,
fish,
yeah,
right?
right.
But in their head, that's what they've seen, right? They've seen those fish jumping, with the bears, and that's what you think of when you think of a red sockeye salmon.
Yeah,
You're not
yeah.
thinking it's just this chrome, bright fish. So yeah, when we go rainbow fishing and we actually hit those spawned out ones, a lot of clients, well, yeah, can we get a picture with this? Because that's what they,
That's what they envision,
that's what
right?
they envision, is when they're salmon fishing, is that's
They
what the
don't
fish are going to look
understand the
like.
metamorphosis side of how that change
Hmm. Hmm.
occurs, et cetera. And it is so unique. I mean, one does not look like the other at all.
Yeah. And then at the very end of it was when you're still out there fishing for silvers and trout, and then you see, what we kind of term, zombie fish,
Zombie
right? So
fish,
yeah,
right?
when they're completely, degraded and falling apart and they're barely moving and they're swimming upside down and backwards and they're,
Yeah, they look like they're covered in like mold or something,
yeah.
and you're like, no, it's just the end of the life, man. It's part
Hmm.
of it. And then,
Yep.
by the way, when that's occurring, we can go down and swing
Hmm.
flesh flies, excuse me,
Yep.
and be successful in that area. And then you have to explain that whole side. And that's really
Yep.
cool. And those fish, they die, they start to fall apart, their flesh
Hmm.
floats through the system, and all the other fish that are feeding are looking, hey, there's
Hmm.
some food, boom. And that can be really fun. I mean, swinging a fly to fish can be absolutely amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, with the flesh fly, more just dead drifting it with those flesh flies, and we can actually do that almost throughout the whole run of the sockeye or the salmon seasons because we also have bright colored flesh flies, right? So we've got like those bright pinks and bright reds. So you're essentially targeting areas where people are now filleting the salmon and they're
Mm.
throwing the carcasses back into the river system, which is allowed. I know some places you're not allowed to throw
Yeah, it's almost like a
salmon
chum,
carcasses back
right?
in,
I mean,
right? Yeah. So we're essentially, we're fattening up these fish. We're literally throwing all these carcasses back into the river system after we fillet them. And the trout are just, gorging themselves on it. So, you find someone who's just spent like hours cleaning fish in this area or, a hot spot where guides have been cleaning for a while. You go ahead and drift a line below that with a flesh fly on it, right? So big, what looks like a big chunk of fillet
yeah.
floating down too. And they're gonna key off on that as well. So it's kind of nice to do
Interesting.
both. So.
Well, let's do this. We've got a few minutes left. I want to leave some time for us to talk about our tip for understanding the pink salmon ears.
Mhm.
But before we do that, I would love if you could talk about bears,
Okay.
because you, as a child, grew up in Alaska, have had that experience all the way through your life. But
Right.
most people that go to Alaska, they think bears, oh, how beautiful, etc. But then when they have their first Alaskan encounter,
Hmm.
which is, oh my gosh, that's a huge bear and it's right over there,
Hmm.
the panic starts to set in. And if you could describe like what's actually occurring and why they don't bother you, etc., that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So, like you said, growing up with it, it's not something that is, when you're fishing, right? In different scenarios, they're more terrifying than they are. When we're fishing, it's not a big concern of ours, at least not on the Kenai River. I can't speak for other areas. And it is funny, you said, it's not a big deal for us, but if I go down to the States, I know nothing about snakes. I want nothing to, I don't
Right.
want to be, I see any kind of snake, I want nothing to do with it, So
Right.
it's funny how it just, what you're used to, right?
Right. Right.
But for us on the Kenai system, you're mostly seeing them up around that Russian River, Cooper Landing area.
Okay.
Up there in the mountains where they're coming out. And so pretty much what they tell you, if you see them on the Russian or anywhere in that area, you just kind of turn around and walk away, right? Just leave them
Hmm.
be. You're not going to want to get super close to these bears, especially if it's a sow and a cub. You definitely
Yep.
want to give them space. But yeah, for the most part, they're there for the salmon, just like we are, and that's what their food source is, right? At that time of the year, so that's what they're there for. They're used to the crowds, they're used to the people being there. So for us, as long as we give them space and don't agitate them, they're not going to bother us. No
Yeah.
one's usually when people walk into the Russian River to go fly fish up there or to go after these salmon, they're going to bring bear spray. Some might carry a handheld gun on them.
Hmm.
We don't. At the most, I'll have a bear spray on my hip just in case, just because you don't know if you're going to run into a sow that's being overly protective.
Right. Or
You don't
come
want
around a blind on one and
exactly come
startle
around a
it
blind.
or
All of a sudden,
something.
you've got one right in your face. The park will let you know. Hey, there's been a bear sighting. There's usually signs up that'll let you
Yeah.
know ahead of time. Hey, there's a bear here, a bear there. But for the most part, like I said, their food source is the salmon, and that's what they're interested in. So, kind of similar to what you see over in Bristol Bay, where you can get really close to them.
Yeah.
They could care less about people as long as
Yeah, they
you're.
really do.
Yeah.
It's quite unique when you first see it because, like you said, I think where I was at up at the falls was their regulation was something like, if it's within 40 feet, you need to vacate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really close. Most
Yeah.
people, you know, or most times it's even before that you're moving on. But
Absolutely.
to look up and see 10, 15 bears was nothing out of the normal.
Mm-hmm.
One. And then two, what I always found really interesting was, like you said, they're there for the fish. And what's so unique about bears that I see is they'll catch a fish, they'll pretty much bite the head, um, and like eat the brains, which is like super rich nutrient source.
Mm-hmm.
And then they strip the skin and eat it, and the rest they like throw away. And then it's like on and on. In some areas, you'll go into these like side creeks, and you'll just see carcasses everywhere, where you're
Mm-hmm.
like,
Oh, yeah.
"Wow, this was bear heaven," you know. But it's really unique. I think how they just have zero interest in you, really
Right.
have zero interest in you. And I would say you nailed it in that, like, unless you're really disturbing them or startling them for some
Yeah.
off reason, they just don't want anything to do with you. And it's such an experience as a person to be that kind of close and see those animals in the wild. It's really cool. Really
Mm-hmm.
cool.
For me, growing up here, and then I was never been able to afford going over Bristol Bay and doing the $10,000 a week trip over there. Was fortunate enough, I got a call one day. An outfit over there had a guide that was sick, and they were looking for
Mm.
someone to fill in. And I got the call, and I got to go over there for a week. And so here I am putting these clients on fish, on the brooks and some of the other streams over there. And, they're hooking fish. And there's like you said, a bear, 20,
Right
30
there.
feet
Yeah.
away right there. And I'm just like, so I'm trying to keep my cool too. I'm like, just keep fishing. Just let's land that fish, So you're
Yeah.
landing fish and there's a bear right there,
Right
So,
there.
it's just a very unique, we see them on the Russian River, but nothing like that. You're right. You don't just have these giant grizzlies walking, next to you while you're hooking on this rainbow and letting it go. And that's just part of how it goes. And
Yeah, it's really crazy.
yeah,
And the
so
population can be insane. I have a number that's stuck in my head because it's my birthday.
okay,
My birthday's September 23rd. And I
okay,
remember we were in Alaska in September, and we did a fly out to a small area, um, fairly remote, but high fish populations.
hmm
And we were walking out, and I said to my buddy, I can't believe how many bears we've seen today. And we just stopped and counted the number of bears that we could see in our vision. And there were
hmm
23 of them.
oh my gosh,
And it was like, where do we go? Like
yeah,
everywhere we went, it was like, there's bears there,
yeah,
but you just kind of walked through and meandered your way through and
hmm
didn't get in the bushes, stayed in the
right,
river,
yeah, right.
didn't startle anybody,
Mhm.
made some noise, but it was really cool to have that experience. What an amazing
Yeah,
thing. So,
we did a trip again over to my friend's lodge across the inlet. Brought the whole family, and they've got a unique, landing craft. They bring it right up to the shore, and this was during June, so the salmon weren't in the system yet over there. So the bears at the time were just eating the grass, and we had the bear guide with us, and he's like, "Nope, we're just going to walk right through it." I'm holding my, at that point, which was maybe. 18-month-old
yeah.
and a 3-year-old at the time, I think, something like that. And he's like, nope, perfectly safe. And we literally just walk through what they call Bear Alley, and we've got bears, and we're sitting there, and then we sit down and we get to just observe it. And my kids are talking and roaring at the bear, and
Yeah. So
and
cool.
it just sat there eating its grass, like, okay, yeah, what's what are you
Yeah.
guys doing? It
It,
just
it's
didn't
so
care.
cool. It is so cool. And mine was really unique because I was there during COVID.
Okay, oh wow.
And so I remember going to the falls,
Hmm.
and there was, I think, 4 of us total, besides the guides in the park.
Hmm.
That's it. There were 4
Wow,
anglers.
that's crazy.
And, my buddy had been there years prior, and he's like, you see that platform up there? He's like, there's usually like 80 people up there with like tens of thousands of dollars lenses
Hmm.
in one person's
Hmm.
hand. And
Yeah.
I was like, really? There's nobody up there, It
Yeah.
was really cool. I mean, we
That's
had an
awesome that you got
amazing
to do. Yeah,
experience. Yeah.
that you got
We
to do it
took
for
the
yourself.
chance, and
Yeah.
had to do all the medical checks and the worries and everything else. But
Hmm.
I said to him, hey, it's probably the best time to travel. Everybody's getting
Yeah.
medical checked. There's
Hmm.
barely anybody on the planes, and like,
Hmm.
let's just go for it. And we
Absolutely.
did. It was pretty cool.
Very
Well, we
cool.
got a few minutes left. What I would love for you to do is talk about understanding the pink salmon years, because I think that's really important from targeting rainbow standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, obviously, pink salmon stay out in the ocean just for 2 years. So for our river system coming in the Kenai, That just happened to be on even years. So every even year, 2024 included, that's when the pink salmon return. And that doesn't mean we don't see a couple of stragglers of pink salmon coming in on the odd years. But for the most part, the bulk of them will come in on even years. So we always look forward to it, because basically that means, what that means for a rainbow standpoint, excuse me, is that there's just going to be way more food sources in the river, everywhere from they're going to be dropping more eggs. So that means that those fish are putting on more weight, getting bigger, more. We know where to target those rainbows because we know where the pink salmon are spawning at. So they all have their gravel bars where they go, right?
Right, right.
So it makes it easier. You're going to find more of a higher concentration of those rainbows in those areas versus, if the pinks aren't spawning, that might spread those trout out through, Kenai River is a very large river. It'll spread those rainbows out, a little bit harder to track down where they're fishing or where they're holding up at that time, right? When the pinks are spawning, we know where to find them. We know, what size bead to put on to target them. So it just makes it a lot easier to get after them. And like I said, and they get that much bigger. And then when those pinks start to decay, right, now you got even more food sources. And so that it makes them even bigger as far as getting all that flesh that's floating through the system as well.
Yeah.
So we definitely look forward to those even years, just because we know the rainbow fishing is going to be just that much better than it is on the odd years.
It's like a cicada year down here in the U.S. It's like you hear those numbers and you're like, you start rubbing your hands together. Exactly. Here it comes. So the pinks are the runs longer in term or shorter in term? How do those kind of play into the system?
Yeah, I guess, tell you the truth, I don't, as far as when they start showing up, they show up around the same time as the silvers. I don't know if there's technically 2 runs of them or not, or if it's just one big long one. It kind of just seems like we start to see them trickling in at the end of the second sockeye run there in August, and they'll start coming, all the way through September. So I wish I knew more information on that. If there's actually 2 runs of the pinks, like I said, we don't really, there's not a lot of monitoring on the pinks. And for those that don't know, when they hit the freshwater system, their body starts to deteriorate much faster than the other salmon. So you get them, and even if you catch one that's fresh, that's only been in the system for maybe a day, when you fillet that fish, the meat is already pretty pale. It's starting to get really soft and squishy. So it's just not something you typically want to eat.
Right.
It's a lot of fun for the kids. The kids love to catch them. They'll hit plugs when you're back trolling and stuff with conventional tackle. So it is a lot, they'll hit flies, they'll hit everything. They'll literally go after whatever's out there, and they will bite. So it is a lot of fun. It's almost like a guaranteed way to get a kid on a fish if they want to catch a salmon, and they're smaller. I take that some of those big bucks can get pretty nasty. Pretty they have those big hump, and and so they're a little bit harder to bring in. But so it is fun for the kids to catch, but you don't want to keep them. A lot of people, you will hear of people will catch them right when they come in, and they'll smoke them when you first catch them. I'm still, there's still sockeye and silvers in there, so I haven't tried it before.
I
haven't gone that far yet to needing the pink salmon. Maybe one day we'll need to, but
hopefully not. Hopefully
not. But for the most part, it's just for us that love to rainbow fish, it's just a means of getting those rainbows even fatter and finding easier ways to get to them. So
very cool. Well, I think that's really important. Something to think of, right? During your trips, and how to maybe target those types of years too, if you're trying to think of maybe a trip of a lifetime or something like that. All those different scenarios. And of course you had a great description of the Kenai, and I really love how you can go to that area and have an Alaskan experience. And it's everything, like you said, from glaciers to fishing, etc., and how cool that is. So I really appreciate you being on the show today, Dallas. You obviously know the area very well, having grown up there. You've got a great perspective on the region, and I'm sure you're an amazing guide. I appreciate all your time, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Appreciate it. Yeah,
guys, that's all we got here for today. If you want to get a hold of Dallas, how do we do that, Dallas?
Best will be just checking out my website, explorekenai.net, or just give me a call. I do all the bookings myself, and then you end up either in the boat with me or my husband. Number is 907-690-6477. check me out on social media, all those type of things. So
Yeah.
it's whatever works for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Dallas. Great having you on the
Thank
show.
you.
Hey, everybody. We'll see you next week. Tune in for another show and a great guest. Talk to you soon.